I never thought the woman I quietly saved from cancer would one day call me a parasite. But there I stood, suitcase in hand, heart, cracking in silence, while my own husband Daniel told me I had overstayed my welcome in our home. He didn't even look me in the eye. I had paid for his mother's chemo in secret, draining my inheritance, sacrificing my dreams. And still it was her poisonous words he believed. That night, as I slept in my car outside a 24-hour laundromat, I promised myself, no more silence, no more sacrifice. She will learn the price of betrayal. My name is Lena Whitmore, and I live in South Carolina, but not for long. I stood there barefoot on the hardwood floor of a home I helped pay for, clutching a chipped coffee mug, like it could somehow stop the ground from crumbling beneath me. My husband Daniel wouldn't even meet my eyes. "It's for the best, Lena," he said, voice flat, hands shoved into his pockets like a teenager trying to disappear. And then she said it. His mother, Joyce. Her arms crossed, her lips curled in that condescending half-smirk she always wore like a weapon. "She's a parasite, Daniel. You let her leech off us long enough." Parasite. That word clung to my skin like smoke. I could barely process it. I wanted to scream, "I'm the one who paid your hospital bills. You ungrateful witch." But I didn't. I swallowed my voice like I always had. Because I was raised to keep peace, to endure, to believe that sacrifice made love stronger. God, how naive I was. They watched me pack a single suitcase in silence. No one asked where I would go. No one offered me a glass of water or a minute to breathe. Not even Daniel, the man I nursed through his depression. The man whose career I helped build while I shelved my own. The man I married thinking we were partners. His only parting words were, "I hope you figure things out." What I figured out as I sat in the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat that night with rain pounding the windshield of my car was this: they thought I was powerless. They thought they could discard me like trash. They thought I would crawl away quietly. But I had a secret. A truth so sharp it could split their smug little world in two. I had the receipts. I had the legal rights. I had the knowledge they never bothered to ask about. And suddenly I saw myself not as a broken wife but as a storm waiting to strike. That night, I whispered a promise to myself through clenched teeth, watching the steam rise from my cheap gas station coffee. No more silence. No more begging. No more shrinking to fit their comfort. I'm not the parasite. I'm the one who paid the price, and now they'll pay too. My name is Lena Whitmore, and I live in South Carolina. And if Joyce Whitmore thought cancer was her biggest enemy, she hasn't met the woman she called worthless yet. When I first met Daniel, I mistook politeness for depth and sweetness for strength. He was quiet, charming in a careful way, and unlike the arrogant men I'd dated before he listened. Or at least he pretended to. I fell hard for the version of him that existed in my mind, the version who would fight for me, stand beside me and build a life where I didn't always have to be the strong one. But the truth is, Daniel never protected me. Not from strangers, not from life, and especially not from his mother. Joyce made her opinion of me clear from day one. "I wasn't raised right," she said, "because I'd grown up with a single father. I didn't come from good people. I was too independent, too ambitious, too outspoken." She hated that I didn't wait on Daniel hand and foot like her generation believed a wife should. But what grated her most was that I didn't need them, at least not financially. And still for years I tried to win her over. I cooked her favorite meals, bought her scarves I couldn't afford, smiled through backhanded compliments like, "That dress is brave on your figure, dear." Or, "I suppose you had to settle for this career path, huh?" Daniel would laugh it off. "That's just Mom," he'd say, every time she tore me down with her polished cruelty. I let it slide because I thought love was about enduring. I believed if I just showed how much I cared, things would change. I took care of Daniel through his panic attacks, supported him when he quit 2 jobs in 2 years, and picked up freelance projects just to make sure we didn't miss a mortgage payment. When Joyce got sick, I didn't hesitate. I told Daniel not to worry about the cost. I paid the hospital bills quietly. cashed out part of the inheritance my father left me. Joyce never knew. I didn't want her to feel ashamed or burdened. What a fool I was. She didn't feel gratitude, only entitlement. I should have seen it the way Daniel never stood up to her. Not once. He would rather let her insult me to my face than risk her cold silence. His loyalty was never to me. It was to the woman who raised him on guilt manipulation and emotional blackmail. And somehow I thought love would rewrite that history. But the moment Joyce turned on me, Daniel didn't hesitate. Not even a pause. Not even a, "What did she ever do to you, Mom?" He just stood there letting her spit venom in my direction like I deserved it. It shattered something in me. Not just my heart. My belief that love, real love, would ever ask me to disappear so someone else could feel bigger. I gave this man 10 years of my life. I gave up grad school. I turned down a promotion to move for his job. I sat at his mother's hospital bed night after night, feeding her soup she never thanked me for. And he called me the burden. That's when I realized loyalty doesn't come from love. It comes from character. And Daniel had none. I wasn't the fool anymore. I was the woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. The next day I made a call. To someone who had owed my father a favor. A man with a briefcase full of documents that would soon wipe the smugness off Joyce's face. It was time I stopped trying to belong and started taking back what was mine. Joyce Whitmore never knew the cost of staying alive. She only knew the comfort of having it paid for. When the diagnosis came late-stage lymphoma, it was Daniel who fell apart first. He collapsed into himself like a child paralyzed by fear and guilt. Joyce didn't have insurance. Her savings were gone, spent on luxury handbags, cosmetic procedures, and vacations with her bridge club. Suddenly, survival had a price tag no one in their family could afford, except me. I remember standing in that sterile hospital corridor staring at the estimate the billing nurse handed me. The numbers blurred, but I didn't hesitate. I nodded once. "Bill me, privately." Daniel never knew the full amount. I told him I'd found a charity a partial grant. Some coverage. All lies. What I found was the strength to quietly carry the weight his family refused to shoulder. I liquidated half of my inheritance, $146,000 in total. Gone. Just like that. Not because I loved Joyce, but because I loved Daniel. Because I still believed that maybe somehow this sacrifice would finally prove my worth to his mother. It didn't. The chemo worked. Slowly. Painfully. Joyce pulled through. But her gratitude, it was microscopic. She never asked how the bills got paid. Never once said thank you. She just emerged from her illness more bitter than before, convinced that surviving made her invincible and entitled. She returned home acting like a queen, throwing insults like confetti at my expense. "You always wear that color. It washes you out. If I had your income, I wouldn't be so picky about food. Maybe if you spent less time working, Daniel would be happier." But I kept my mouth shut. Because secrets like mine can't be shouted. They have to be revealed with precision when it hurts most. I kept every hospital invoice, every payment receipt, every transfer confirmation with my name on it. Not for recognition, but for truth. For leverage. In my mind, I saw a different ending: Daniel realizing how much I gave. Joyce apologizing. Maybe even tears. That fantasy died the night they threw me out like garbage. Now those receipts are no longer proof of my love. They're proof of my power. They thought I was a guest in that house. But they were standing on a foundation built with my money, my silence, my sacrifice. And they'll learn soon the woman they called a parasite was the one keeping their lights on. I'm done letting generosity be mistaken for weakness. They took my home. Now I'll take back everything else. There's something cruel about resentment, how it grows not from neglect, but from kindness. The more I helped Joyce, the more she seemed to hate me. After her recovery, I thought maybe there would be a shift. That she'd recognize I had stood by her through it all. That I'd earned a place in her hardened heart. But no. The woman who rose from the hospital bed wasn't softened by survival. She was sharpened by it. her tongue, her eyes, her presence, they all cut deeper. I became her daily target. The breathing proof that she owed someone, and that truth made her itch. Lena, this roast is dry. You're working again. Shouldn't a wife be home when her husband gets in? Maybe you can't have children because you're always so stressed. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because Daniel never stepped in, and silence became my routine. I started shrinking, hunching my shoulders when I entered the room, avoiding meals, when Joyce was home, locking myself in the office to work late just to escape her sneers. She moved through our house like she owned it. Correction, my house. The deed was in Daniel's name, but the down payment had come from me. My money, my credit, my sacrifice. But she never saw me as an equal, only an outsider who didn't understand family. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my father had raised me on principles she couldn't spell. Integrity, patience, strategy. I didn't react when she belittled my infertility. I didn't lash out when she accused me of emasculating her son. I didn't even flinch when she accidentally served food I was allergic to. I took it all in, cataloged it, prepared. Her words weren't just insults, they were nails. And with everyone she hammered into me, she built the very coffin where her dignity would rest. I watched her poison Daniel slowly, day after day. She whispered into his ear when she thought I wasn't listening. I saw his face shift first, confused, then irritated, then cold. He started coming home later, talking less, asking more questions like, "Why don't you cook more? Why don't we see my mom's friends? Are you sure your career isn't getting in the way of us?" Joyce didn't just want me out. She wanted to erase me, turn me into a ghost in my own marriage, a servant in my own home. And the tragedy is, I let it happen. But not anymore. Let her spew venom. Let her smirk from her throne in my kitchen. Let her believe she won. Because when the day comes, and it will, when she finally sees the hospital records, the property deeds, the ownership documents, she will realize she was never the queen. She was a pawn in my game, and I was just waiting for checkmate. I didn't cry right away. You'd think I would have. After being humiliated, betrayed, and discarded like a piece of rotting fruit, you'd think the tears would have poured out the moment the front door slammed behind me. But instead, I drove. I didn't even know where I was going. I just kept turning corners, avoiding familiar streets, as if the shame clinging to my skin could be shaken off by distance. The sun had dipped behind the clouds by the time I realized I had nowhere to go. Not one single friend I could call without having to explain too much. No hotel I could afford without tapping into the last of my reserves, so I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat, the kind where the lights hum like they're alive, and the air smells like soap and sadness. I parked in the corner space tucked between a dumpster and a flickering street lamp and turned off the ignition. The silence was deafening. I leaned back in the seat watching the ceiling of the car, and for the first time that day, I allowed the truth to settle in my bones. They threw me out. Joyce with her smirking cruelty, Daniel with his cowardly silence. After everything I gave, after everything I endured, they still saw me as disposable. My back ached from the angle of the seat. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. I pulled my coat tighter around me like armor. There, in the dim light, I opened my purse and pulled out the manila folder I had never shown anyone. Inside, copies of every hospital bill I paid. Wire transfers. Statements with my name in bold. I flipped through them slowly, one by one, letting each sheet remind me of who I really was: not a freeloader, not a parasite, a provider, a protector, a woman who paid her enemies' bills while they spit in her face. And then I remembered something, my father's voice from years ago when I was just a girl. You only need 2 things to start over, Lena: your name and your will. If you've got both, no one can take you down. I still had both. That night I didn't cry. I planned. I opened the Notes app on my phone and started writing dates, amounts, addresses, a timeline, a blueprint. Not just to get back what I was owed, but to destroy their illusion of power. The next morning I walked into a diner and ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu. The waitress called me sweetheart, and poured me an extra cup of coffee. That tiny moment of kindness nearly broke me, but I held it together because I was done begging, done shrinking, done explaining myself to people who only saw what I could give. That night in the car was my breaking point, but also my rebirth. They thought they ended my story. They didn't realize they gave me a reason to start writing a new one with blood-red ink, and a signature they would never forget. Lena Whitmore, South Carolina, property owner, debt holder, woman on a mission. 2 days after the night in the car, I stood outside the downtown law office of Marcus Harlan, clutching a paper cup of gas station coffee and a folder full of forgotten power. My hair was still unwashed. I wore the same jeans from the night Daniel threw me out. But none of that mattered, because Marcus had been my father's attorney and the only man left alive who truly knew what my family had built. I hadn't seen Marcus in nearly 10 years. He was the one who handled my father's estate after the heart attack that took him too early. Back then I was young in love and foolishly generous. I told Marcus to liquidate half of the inheritance and wire it to a joint account with Daniel. The other half I had tucked it away into a quiet savings account that Joyce and Daniel never knew existed. Until now I had forgotten the second clause of the trust, the part my father insisted on. And thank God he did. Marcus looked up from his leather chair and blinked when he saw me. "Lena, Jesus, you look like hell." I smiled for the first time in days. "You should see the other guy." He offered me water, warmth, and silence, then pulled up the documents I hadn't touched in a decade. And there it was, my father's last gift. "Your father had the foresight of a chess player," Marcus said, tapping a clause at the bottom of the trust. "If you're ever wrongfully displaced from any property you funded or cohabited in a marital capacity, this triggers your full legal rights to reclaim that asset or collect equivalent restitution." My hands trembled. "So, the house. Technically, it's not just yours. It's protected under your father's legal conditions. Daniel can't sell it. Joyce can't live in it without your permission. You could evict them tomorrow." I didn't cry. I burned. Every humiliating moment I endured. Joyce's sneers. Daniel's betrayal. The cold floor of the car. The word parasite suddenly shifted in my memory. They hadn't kicked me out. They'd stepped onto my property and declared war. "What if I want to enforce it?" I asked. Marcus leaned back. "Then I'll file the motion. But be prepared, this will be ugly." I looked down at my stained shirt and broken nails. "I'm way past ugly, Marcus. I'm ready." For the first time since that cursed night, I felt solid, anchored, armed. They thought they cut me loose, but they forgot my roots ran deeper than they ever imagined. My father didn't raise me to kneel. He raised me to wait, and now it was my move. I drove straight to the county clerk's office after leaving Marcus's law firm, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. It was time to stop guessing, time to stop hoping, time to see it for myself. The property records were public, which made it all the sweeter. I paid the $5 hour fee, signed my name on the request form, and within minutes the clerk handed me a printed document. I held it in trembling fingers. There it was. Owner Daniel Whitmore and Lena Whitmore. Not or, not former, not removed. Just us. Still, I had been co-owner the whole time. And even though I'd moved out, they never updated the deed. Joyce, for all her scheming, had never bothered to check. Maybe she assumed Daniel had taken care of it. Maybe she thought kicking me out made it true. But legal ownership doesn't evaporate with insults. I was still on that deed, which meant the house was just as much mine as it was Daniel's, no matter how many times Joyce called me a parasite or told her friends I was living off her charity. I felt a laugh rise in my throat, not from humor, but from something darker, something colder. They had waged war on the very woman paying their bills, living under her roof, all while treating me like a stain to be scrubbed off their lives. I imagined Joyce standing in the kitchen yelling about how I never contributed, all while leaning on the marble countertops I had paid for. I imagined Daniel complaining to his co-workers that I was selfish while driving the SUV I had leased under my name. They thought I had nothing, but they had no idea that the woman they discarded so casually had been the ones silently holding the walls up around them. And now I held the one thing they couldn't take back proof. I tucked the deed into a new folder labeled Reclamation. Then I made 3 copies. One for my lawyer, one for the courts, and one for Joyce, hand-delivered at just the right moment. I didn't just want restitution. I wanted recognition. I wanted that look on Joyce's face when the lie she'd wrapped herself in unraveled completely. They thought they'd written me out of the story, but I was still inked in every corner of that house, and I was ready to write the next chapter with fire. The first thing I did was cut my hair. Not a trim, not a soft feminine bob that begged to be liked. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a cheap motel with kitchen scissors and sliced off the pieces that had once clung to Daniel's fingers. The ends that curled prettily when Joyce used to backhand compliment me, "Your hair is your only real asset." I watched the strands fall into the sink like burnt offerings. That night I dyed it black, sleek, sharp, unrecognizable. Not because I needed a disguise, but because the woman they banished didn't exist anymore. The next day I bought a fitted blazer, walked into a consignment store and chose pointed heels I could weaponize with a single stomp. I didn't walk out looking elegant. I walked out looking like someone who could destroy a family with one phone call. And maybe I would? I began training my voice in the mirror, lowering it half an octave. No more softness. No more trailing off, second-guessing my words, apologizing before I spoke. I practiced saying things like, "Actually, I own that. You'll need to vacate the property. Here's the receipt." Every day I became less of the woman I had been, less hopeful, less hesitant, less hungry for affection, and more dangerous, because being good had gotten me nowhere. It had fed Joyce's cruelty, fueled Daniel's indifference, made me a convenience, not a partner. Now I wouldn't be ignored, I wouldn't be dismissed, and I wouldn't be quiet. I studied the law. I reread every clause in my father's trust. I rehearsed the words I would use in court if it came to that. I lined up documents like daggers, medical bills, property deeds, financial statements Joyce couldn't explain away. I was preparing not just to reclaim my life, but to shatter theirs with the truth. I had no interest in forgiveness. I had no more desire for their approval. They had spent years sculpting me into a woman who wouldn't fight back, and now they would learn what happened when she finally did. I booked a spot at a family gathering I knew Joyce would be attending, a charity banquet her bridge club hosted every spring. I had RSVP'd anonymously, but when I arrived, she'd see me. Not in rags, not with tears, but in heels holding the folder that would burn through her pride like acid. And when our eyes met across that ballroom, she wouldn't see Lena the housewife. She'd see Lena Whitmore, daughter of Joseph Whitmore, co-owner of her precious home, and the woman whose silence had protected her from ruin until now. The last time Joyce saw me, I had one suitcase in hand and tears in my eyes. This time I had a tailored black suit, a soft burgundy lip, and a smile so calm it made people uneasy. I arrived at the Midland Ladies' Spring Benefit Gala, 30 minutes late on purpose. I wanted a full room. I wanted the moment to land. The event was exactly what I remembered: starched tablecloths, glittering wine glasses, and brittle women clinking forks while exchanging gossip like currency. I stepped through the entrance heels, echoing a folder tucked neatly under my arm labeled Personal. Joyce sat at table 3 in the center, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. When she saw me, her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She blinked once, twice, then did that thing all power-hungry women do when they're afraid. She smiled like a snake and whispered to the woman beside her. I walked directly to her table. "Joyce. Lena." Her voice was sugar-laced cyanide. "I wasn't aware you were invited." "Oh, I wasn't." I smiled wider. "But then again, I've paid for more things than I've been invited to lately. Haven't I?" Her face didn't twitch, but her knuckles whitened around her napkin. Daniel was beside her. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since throwing me out his eyes-sunken shirt too tight. Regret never fits well when it arrives late. "What are you doing here?" he asked, shifting in his chair. "Delivering something." I laid the folder gently in front of Joyce like it was dessert. Inside, copies of every hospital bill paid from my account. The trust clause. The deed showing me as co-owner. The legal notice from Marcus 30 days to vacate or begin paying rent. Joyce opened it, eyes scanning rapidly. Her smile twitched just once. Then silence. The woman beside her leaned in to peek. Is everything all right, Joyce? It's a mistake, she snapped. Just some paperwork. I took a long sip of water, then leaned down until only she could hear. You called me a parasite. You said I lived off you. But I kept you alive. I paid for your second chance. And now you'll pay me what I'm owed, or you can explain to your little club how you got evicted by the woman you threw out. Her face turned pale. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. I stood up straight, adjusted my collar, and smiled one last time. I won't be staying for dinner. I've got property to reclaim. As I walked out, I felt every eye follow me, not in pity this time, but in awe. The whispers started before I reached the door, and I let them spread like wildfire. Let her try to rewrite the story, because now I had the facts, the proof, the power, and I had returned not for their approval, but for their reckoning. Joyce always fancied herself unbreakable. A woman who'd beaten cancer, buried a husband, raised a son into a man, her words, not mine. But even the strongest steel bends under pressure, and I had just placed 1,000 pounds of truth on her manicured lap. The morning after the gala, Marcus served the formal eviction notice at her front door. 30 days. Pay market rate rent, backdated to the day I was thrown out or leave. The silence from her end was almost louder than her insults used to be. I pictured her in that kitchen, my kitchen scrambling through drawers trying to find papers, bank statements, anything to dispute what she already knew was true. I imagined her calling Daniel, shrieking into the phone. Did you know she still owned the house? Did you sign something? But there was nothing she could do. I hadn't tricked her. I hadn't forged or lied or schemed. I had simply waited. Joyce's world wasn't built on truth. It was built on appearances, on carefully constructed lies that she ran the household, that Daniel was the provider, that I was the lucky girl they graciously let stay. But when the foundation cracked, everything else followed. Her friends started calling me. Lena, I had no idea it was your money. She told us you were just a temp worker. We feel so misled. Oh, how the mighty hate pity. Joyce stopped showing up to her bridge club. She skipped her Tuesday hair appointment for the first time in a decade. She started peering through curtains instead of answering the door. Even Daniel looked different now. I passed him once in the grocery store. He pretended not to see me, but I saw the guilt in his posture, in the way he reached for generic cereal, like he couldn't afford better. Good. Let him taste humility. Let him wonder how long before I came for the SUV, the shared accounts, his access to the family trust I now controlled. Joyce, though she crumbled slower. She called Marcus's office 3 times in one day, trying to renegotiate. She wanted just a little more time, said she was unaware of the legal specifics, and at one point even offered to make amends. I told Marcus to respond with one sentence. You had a daughter-in-law, not a maid. And now you have a landlord. Let her sit with that. Let her lie in the guest room, the same one she forced me to sleep in after I made too much noise working late nights, surrounded by her porcelain dolls and self-righteousness. This wasn't revenge for one insult. This was repayment for a decade of erasure, of being talked over, talked down to, shut out of family photos, left off group texts, ignored when I was sick, forgotten when I succeeded. This was balance, and Joyce was learning at last that some debts don't go unpaid forever. When Daniel opened the door and saw me standing there, his first instinct wasn't to apologize. It was to look afraid. He blinked like he couldn't believe I was real. Maybe part of him hoped I'd vanish just as quietly as I'd left. Still the obedient wife, still the woman who absorbed shame like a sponge and called it love. But I wasn't her anymore. I handed him a small envelope, cream-colored, elegant. Inside, a notice of legal proceedings. A breakdown of rent owed since my unlawful removal. Divorce papers. His hand trembled as he took it. Lena, you're really doing this. I tilted my head, studied the man I once would have burned the world for. You already did this, Daniel. I'm just finishing it. He glanced around nervously, as if hoping Joyce would sweep in and save him. but she was cowering behind the hallway door out of sight. Her kingdom was falling, and its queen had no more soldiers. Daniel tried to speak some broken explanation about not wanting to pick sides about being caught in the middle. I let him talk. Let him vomit out excuses. "You were so intense," he said. "Always working. Always talking about responsibility. My mom she thought you were trying to control everything." I smiled gently, almost pityingly. "And instead of defending me, you let her destroy me." His eyes filled with tears. That used to mean something to me. "I didn't know about the medical bills," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to," I said. "I did it because I loved you. Because I thought family meant more than convenience." He sat down on the couch, head in his hands. The same couch I'd picked out. Paid for. Vacuumed 100 times after his mother's endless trail of cookie crumbs. "I messed up." "No, Daniel," I corrected. "You made a choice. And I had too." I didn't want him back. I didn't want an apology or closure, or even forgiveness. I wanted freedom. And I wanted to see the exact moment he realized he lost me, not just my body or my presence, but the version of me who would have stayed even now. He looked up as I turned to leave. "Lena, what happens now?" I paused in the doorway. Now I said, my voice calm. "Now I collect." And with that, I walked away. He didn't follow. Because even cowards know when they're standing in the presence of a reckoning. It started slowly. First, a woman from Joyce's Bridge Club, Marjorie Lane, the one with the powdery voice and a flair for passive aggression, called me under the guise of just checking in. "We hadn't seen you around, dear. And well, some of us heard about the gala." I let her talk. Let her stammer through her attempt to sound concerned while mining for details. I gave her none. But I didn't need to. Because by then, the truth had already begun leaking through court filings, mutual friends, and the woman I hired to discreetly photograph Joyce picking up her own eviction notice in a bathrobe. The same people who once whispered about my attitude, who said I worked too much, who smiled politely while Joyce joked that I was lucky Daniel settled for me, they were whispering again, only this time not about me. It turned out people love a villain story, but they adore a reversal. Now the gossip went something like, "She paid all those bills and they kicked her out. Wait, she owned the house. Joyce lied to all of us. Oh my God, Lena was funding their lives the whole time." It was poetic, really. Joyce had built her reputation on image. On charm control and carefully selected half-truths she passed off as concern. But now those weapons turned on her. Her carefully curated status as the strong matriarch cracked. And the cracks ran deep. She began losing her grip socially first. Invitations stopped coming. Her usual chair at Bridge Club was suddenly full. Her friends, those polished women in floral dresses, started posting pictures of brunches she wasn't in. Then came the business consequences. Her name was removed from a local board she'd clung to for years. Sponsors quietly pulled out of her charity events. Because no one wants to be associated with a liar. And I didn't even have to say a word. I let the paperwork speak. Let the truth walk in heels clicking and sit down where my voice had once been unwelcome. One day I received a card in the mail unsigned. Inside was a clipping from the town paper. The headline read, "Local woman files ownership claim in family dispute, was secretly paying mother-in-law's medical bills." And below it someone had written in neat cursive, "You were always too good for them." I didn't keep it for ego. I kept it as evidence that even in silence I was never invisible. Joyce tried calling me once during that time. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Lena, I think we should talk. Please. This has gone too far." No, Joyce. It hadn't gone far enough. I didn't just leave them behind. I outgrew them. 37 days after filing the eviction notice and finalizing the divorce papers, I loaded up my car, filled the tank with the last of my savings, and drove to Charleston, the city where my father had always dreamed I'd thrive. Not survive. Thrive. I arrived with no husband, no home, and no plan that made sense to anyone but me. But I had something more powerful than certainty momentum. I rented a tiny studio above a bakery. The floors creaked, the walls peeled, and the air conditioner wheezed in protest, but it was mine. No one rolled their eyes at me. No one scoffed when I came home late. No one called me too much. I woke up every day at 5:30 a.m. and worked like a woman possessed. Using my background in business development, I began consulting for local shops, independent boutiques, struggling startups. The same strategic mind I used to keep Daniel's finances afloat now turned profits for women who had once been ignored like I had. Word spread fast. By the third month, I was fully booked. By the sixth, I had 2 employees. By the end of the year, I had moved into a brick loft downtown with exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a deed that had only my name on it. But it wasn't the money that made me feel rich. It was walking through a grocery store without bracing myself for a comment. It was speaking without apology. It was no longer asking permission to exist in the spaces I created. It was freedom. I changed my number, deleted the old voicemails, donated the clothes Joyce used to mock. I even sold the SUV Daniel drove and sent the final balance due from the rent they'd refused to pay to my father's favorite cancer charity in Joyce's name, of course. Let the tax receipt remind her who really saved her life. In Charleston, I was no longer Daniel's wife or Joyce's burden. I was Lena Whitmore, founder of Second House Consulting, named for the home they thought they took from me. And I made damn sure to tell every new client one thing: don't ever let anyone convince you that you're hard to love just because you're hard to control. That was my gospel now. Not revenge, not bitterness, power, peace, pride. But I wasn't done. Because there was one last thing I needed to do. One final act, not to destroy but to bury the ghost of who I used to be. I wrote the letter on a rainy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the world feels quieter and the past feels closer. I sat at my desk, the one by the window that overlooked the Charleston harbor, and pulled out a sheet of cream paper. No email. No text. No drama. Just ink. Dear Joyce, I paused, smiling faintly. She'd always hated handwritten things, thought them outdated, sentimental, weak. But I wanted this to last. I wanted her to hold it in her hands, read it over and over again, and feel the weight of every word I chose not to scream at her face. You once called me a parasite. You looked me in the eye and told your son I was a burden as I stood in the house I helped buy after paying for the treatments that kept you alive. You threw me out of my own life like I was disposable, and for a while I believed you. But parasites feed on others. I never took, I gave. Quietly. Completely. Stupidly. And yet somehow the more I gave, the more you hated me for it. So now I'm done giving. I included no return address. She didn't deserve one. At the bottom I signed my full name, Lena Josephine Whitmore, Charleston, South Carolina. Then beside it I clipped a printed article, Forbes's Top 40 Under 40 Female Entrepreneurs Redefining Leadership, with my face on the cover. No spite, no mockery, just truth. She could interpret it however she wanted. Maybe she'd crumble. Maybe she'd fume. Maybe she'd read it again and again until it etched into her bones what she never understood. You can't erase a woman who knows her own worth. They had taken my marriage, my reputation, my place at the table. But in the end, I took something bigger. My voice, once silenced in that house, now echoed across boardrooms. My freedom, once buried under obligation, now paved my future. My power, once handed over in fear, now worn like a crown. I used to dream of an apology. Now I only dream forward. Joyce and Daniel are no longer my villains. They're just characters in my origin story, forgettable, bitter, and left behind. What matters now is the woman who rose from the ashes of their betrayal. Not bitter, not broken, brilliant, and absolutely unapologetically unstoppable.